Stanley Kubrick was a filmmaker that believed in the power of images, and he was obsessive about getting the right images to tell his stories. 2001 was the film he seemed to be preparing to make his entire career. Up until then, he was a well-respected filmmaker who'd amassed a body of work that would make any other filmmaker envious. But 2001 solidified his reputation far beyond what mere mortals could ever hope for. It's the film that made him an absolute legend, and every film since became an event that wasn't to be missed. The ape getting his first glimmer of sophistication as a result of coming into contact with the monolith is one of the most powerful moments in all of cinema. And this entire sequence, the monolith, the apes, the transformation, creates a synthesis of ideas that becomes part of Kubrick's coded language. But what do I mean by coded language? Well, Kubrick, funny enough, was fascinated by television commercials, or rather, their ability to sell whole, complete ideas in such a short amount of time. The advertising industry had perfected this method, and he was infinitely curious about their techniques. If you think about it, commercials are some of the most cinematic forms of content. They have to communicate a lot of information in a very short amount of time. Because of this, they resort to techniques that engage the subconscious mind of the viewer in order to influence them to buy a certain product. Kubrick took this method and adapted it for his work in 2001.
But the way he told stories was sometimes antithetical to the way we are accustomed to receiving stories. And I think sometimes Stanley just did that because he didn't want to be like everybody else, and he had a very specific way of telling a story. It's not that he wanted to show off, I'm so different than you. But he said, why does every story have to be told the same way? He would tell me the last couple of years of his life, when we were talking about the form, he kept saying, I want to change the form. I want to make a movie that changes the form. And I said, well, didn't you do that with 2001? He said, just a little bit, but not enough.
Kubrick's obsession with changing the form of cinema drove him to use unorthodox methods in creating his sci-fi masterpiece. 2001 is one of the most baffling films of all time. This is mostly because nothing is spelled out for the audience. The film has probably more to say than any other film in history, and yet it's so difficult to penetrate. It's not even that Kubrick was concealing the ideas and themes. It's that he was communicating them in a way that generally wasn't done, and certainly never done for a film of this scale. The secrets of the film are buried among the images and the very austere way the people in the film behave. Before we get into all that, let's start at the beginning with the Dawn of Man sequence. This sequence is key to understanding what Kubrick was going for. The big ideas the film was concerned with were best expressed by showing the evolution of man. So Kubrick started very early on, and the way the apes communicate with each other and behave are going to become very important later. The intentions with the monolith and apes is pretty obvious, so I won't dwell on it. They evolve as a result of interacting with it. But let's focus on the end of the sequence, specifically Moonwatcher's breakthrough with the bones, and this cut. This cut tells you everything you need to know about Kubrick's intentions with this film, communicating big ideas in the simplest way possible. But what is this idea? What is the connection between the bone and the spacecraft? Well, besides being similar in shape, they're both tools. One is used as a weapon to gain food and power. The other is used to transport humans across vast distances. Think about how extraordinarily simple, yet deeply profound, such a simple cut is. Millions of years of evolution summed up in a microsecond. This is Kubrick toying with the language and form of cinema. And witness the way in which the two different stages of man communicate. The apes don't use verbal language. They use grunts and physical gestures to communicate their intentions and desires. And in hostile situations, their mannerisms take on larger proportions to try and intimidate the opposition. The humans of the future communicate in a kind of sterile, passive-aggressive manner. In both these scenes, there are two opposing sides, one wanting what the other one has. In the case of the apes, it is the watering hole. In the case of the Russians, it is the truth about what's really going on at Clavius, one of the settlements on the moon. With the apes, the strategy is very straightforward. One side wants the whole, the other doesn't want to give it up. So roaring, stomping, and physical intimidation become the strategy. In the case of the humans, the evolution of manners has reached a point in which any direct action to acquire the information in question would be deemed unacceptable. They must tiptoe around the issue in order to maintain an ideal perception of themselves. Beating around the bush is something the apes never did. It is insinuated by Kubrick that the humans of the future are far more concerned with perceptions than they are with truth. Perceptions will become a major factor during the second monolith encounter. This is where the decision to start the movie so early on in the evolution of man begins to make sense, and becomes paramount to Kubrick's intentions. His desire to contrast these two very different ways of interaction in order to make a statement about the direction humanity was headed. In the case of the apes, their actions are almost noble compared to the humans. Say what you want about their methods, but there is no ambiguity in their actions, and their desires and feelings are made perfectly clear and visible to the other side. As a result, situations are resolved swiftly and nothing is hidden. In the case of the later humans, politics has made these situations more complicated, drawn out, and unnecessarily complex. The way the Russian scientist feels about Dr. Floyd's non-answer isn't made clear. He is probably disappointed, but he never expresses this. This lack of human expressiveness is one of the more obvious peculiarities about 2001, and part of what people complain about when they call the film sterile and hard to watch. But this sterility is exactly Kubrick's point. It's a scrubbed, sanitized, synthetic future to the point where there is very little actual humanity to be found. Humans have evolved, but they haven't necessarily improved. This contrast between the two different styles of opposition will become even more important later on, when Bowman is trying to reason with Hal to let him back inside the ship. In fact, after the ape sequence, there is virtually no conflict to be had in this film until the fallout with the computer Hal. Everyone seems cooperative and in agreement, even though there are some very questionable things occurring. In this sense, humans are cooperative, but have become inauthentic, and as a result, less than human. And ironically, it will take a non-human computer to bring some humanity back into the picture. One of the other distinct aspects of 2001 are the long, methodical travel sequences. These sequences take up large chunks of the movie. So why did Kubrick choose this method to communicate his idea of space travel? In other sci-fi movies of the era, space travel was a pretty straightforward affair. Let's get from point A to point B as quickly as possible seemed to be the general idea. The space travel sequences in 2001 are so painstakingly procedural and so stunningly realistic that they become hypnotic. This goes a long way in transporting the audience into the reality Kubrick wants them in. This strategy is another method in which Kubrick is trying to reinterpret the language of cinema, using the power of images to manipulate the viewer. And what happens when the humans find such an amazing artifact, and their first instinct is to brag about it by taking a group photo with it? They are quickly punished with a high-pitched noise which penetrates their space helmets. Why is the monolith doing this? How does it tie into Kubrick's desire to codify the language of the film? Well, if you remember, the apes evolved after interacting with the first monolith, but the humans on the moon don't. The question then becomes, what is the difference between the apes and the humans in this case? As I said before, the apes were more authentic in their communications and desires, and as a result of this, they seem to have a reverential respect for the monolith. But as soon as the humans put their own personal gain before the monolith's power, they're punished for it and not allowed to evolve. In taking photos, they were more concerned with the perception of their discovery rather than the discovery itself. These kinds of ideas would normally be a long, drawn-out, complicated affair, but in trying to change the form of cinema, Kubrick expresses such a profound statement by portraying some simple behavioral traits. So, what else is Kubrick saying about the monolith's intentions, and by extension, evolution itself? The key lies in not only this contrast, but in Bowman's transformative journey later in the film. How the computer is an extension of the film's themes of this new sterilized culture. with its precision but cold, calculated, and deceptive methods. Artificial intelligence has become the new hot-button topic among intellectual circles, especially the worries and anxieties about the implications of true AI and its possible intentions toward humanity. Will it be cooperative and useful, or will it become vengeful and dangerous? Hal's rampage later in the film seems to support the latter theory, but this decision to portray Hal in this manner is extremely important with regards to Kubrick's intentions. During the Jupiter mission, there is a forlorn melancholy to these sequences. During these sequences, human interaction and interactions with Hal is about as rote and perfunctory as one could possibly imagine. You would think a mission to Jupiter, one of the great bodies of the solar system, would elicit more excitement, but Kubrick treats these sequences with the same kind of going through the motions sterility of the earlier sequences. All this greatly suggests the act of existence has devolved into procedure, repetition. Man is exploring the cosmos with about as much enthusiasm as a trip to the dry cleaners. This procedural aspect is also supported by the circular mechanism at the heart of the Discovery 1 ship, in which Poole and Bowman can move as much as they want, but will always end up in the same spot. This is where the film gets interesting. Hal, a computer that has the reputation of never making an error, actually gets something wrong. And after realizing the humans intend to disconnect him, he enacts a preemptive strike by sabotaging Poole. When Bowman goes out to rescue his comrade, Hal refuses to let them inside. So, what's going on here? Why is Hal, a computer that isn't supposed to have feelings, reacting in such a paranoid manner? The only logical explanation is that Hal does have real feelings and is afraid of dying, but it reveals the key to the film's intentions. Think about the earlier sequence with the apes and the scene with the Russians. The apes used intimidation and strong-arm tactics to get what they want. They were aggressive and resolute. The Russian scientists, on the other hand, danced around the issue, preferring pleasantries and maintaining a false perception. Hal, a computer who shouldn't have feelings, becomes aggressive and even vengeful, and takes definitive steps to attain his opposing goals. Like the apes. In a sense, Hal has become more human than the actual humans in the film. Regardless of his methods, there was nothing complicated or ambiguous about his actions, and he had no interest in maintaining false perceptions. These three very simple scenes become the foundation of Kubrick's profound ideas about the state of humanity in this future, and in the next sequences, the seeds of these ideas will blossom. After risking his life to re-enter the spaceship, Bowman's next act is to kill Hal by disconnecting him. Hal's actions have essentially forced him to move beyond passive and become aggressive. In a strange way, Bowman has regained some kind of humanity, and symbolically this opens him up to receive the monolith's gifts and further evolution into a higher state after the film's dazzling Stargate sequence. This sequence is another visual Kubrick uses to create a profound idea in a simple way, the act of moving beyond the barriers of perception and into a kind of fourth-dimensional reality, where time doesn't seem to exist in the way we think it does. Bowman basically ages many decades in just a few minutes of screen time, another profound idea, communicated as simply as possible. These cuts suggest humanity is moving beyond its confined physical frailties and into a more purified energetic state. And it brings Kubrick's big idea full circle. There is probably no other film that achieves this kind of large-scale, stunning visual storytelling in such a simple and elegant way. I feel Kubrick's attempts to create a new cinematic language were mostly successful in 2001, and he used versions of it in his later films, probably most notably in Eyes Wide Shut. But 2001 seemed to contain all of Kubrick's desires for this unique storytelling method, and there will likely never be another film of its kind. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.